Okay, folks, I've just described the prescriptions I got from the prof, who was he was actually a professor of neurosurgery in the London hospital. And Sid would sit in his car at the end of the pit lane when the race went, and he would be sat there with his helmet on, and he'd be smoking a great big cigar as the cars were going round on the formation lap. So Sid would put his cigar out, and basically when the cars went out on the first lap, Sid in the medical car, they would chase round, and then after the first lap, and there was, hoping there was no incidents, then he'd pull in to the pit lane and then drive down the pit lane, and then he would sit at the end, so he was in the rapid response vehicle for any problems during the race. So anyway, the final race of the season was in Australia, and we were all looking forward to going to Adelaide, because they'd had the inaugural race in '85, and this was the second race. And Adelaide, let me tell you, was the best. I went a few times. It was just the best place to be. I've never been to a better race than Adelaide. But this particular race was infamous for mainly one incident. Nigel Mansell had been challenging for the World Drivers' Championship for most of the season, and I think if he hadn't have had a problem at the start in Mexico, I think he would have probably been in a better position to have either won the title there or won it in Australia. But anyway, so we did all of the usual setting up that we did for the race. The whole weekend was just normal. I remember actually fitting most of the Williams tyres for that race, and because you normally got them in batches, so one guy would do one team, one guy would be doing all the McLaren wheels, and then you get the Lotus wheels, and then you get the other teams. Well, I vividly remember doing all the Williams stuff, and then so qualifying went on. It went on Friday, it went on Saturday, and we get to Sunday morning, and after the warm-up, which was 9 till 9:30, the engineers would decide exactly which tyres that they were going to run, and very often they would get the prime set that they wanted to use. They would get them rebalanced. So they brought all the tyres back over to Goodyear, and we rebalanced all of the. I certainly did all the Williams ones once again. I mean, I don't know, 4 sets, 5 sets, something like that. So the race went off, and it was going round, and again, you'll need to. There'll be better people here who remember more about what happened lap by lap. But I remember that Keke Rosberg in the McLaren, his tyre exploded, and then there was suddenly a panic about getting the cars, trying to find out what the problem was with Rosberg's tyre. I think Nigel Mansell was in 3rd or 2nd position. He only needed to finish 3rd to win the World Championship. I was actually stood in the garage with Roseanne Mansell, Nigel's wife, and Nigel's manager called Sheridan Thin, and we were watching the TV on the monitor, and the garage was crowded, but I just happened to be there because as Goodyear fitters, most of the time you weren't really allowed in the pit lane during the race. That was down to the engineers and that. So I'm stood at the back of the garage watching this happen, and I always my memory of it was that they were trying to see what had happened to Rosberg's tyre, but they were trying to get Nigel into the pits. But however it was, Nigel would be wishing that he'd changed tyres, because in one of the most memorable images of any Formula One season was Nigel exploding his tyre on the big long straight in Adelaide. Now, he miraculously kept the car in a straight line, and he went off into the escape road, and the race carried on. Now, most people will know if Nigel had have stopped the car in the middle of the circuit, they would have red flagged the race because it was over 3/4 distance, and he would have won the World Championship. So that was, to say that I pretty well fitted the tyre that exploded for Nigel. Nigel, if you ever see this, I did mention it to you quite a few years later, and I remember you grabbing me around the throat about it, but it was what it was. So so that was the end of the season, really. We all got ready to come out. We were flying back on Monday, and we were flying back through Singapore. But I remember coming down into the reception at the hotel, and I saw this chap sitting at the bar having a cup of coffee, and he got a red cap on. It was like mine, but bright red. And I recognised him, and it was Joe Cocker, and he was actually in town for a gig. And I went over to him and I said, Joe Cocker. He says, yeah. And he said, I said, what are you doing here? He said, I was at the race yesterday. He said, and I've got a gig tonight. He said, would you like some tickets for it? I said, oh, damn. I said, we can't. I said, we're just going to fly out now. So, that would have been great. So we chatted for a few minutes, and it was Joe Cocker. He was a nice guy. And so that was it. We left Australia, and we came out we left to go through Singapore. And we got a night over in Singapore. So we did all the usual Singapore things. Remember going to Raffles Hotel and having a Singapore sling. Went to did we go to the Hard Rock Cafe as well? Yeah, I think, and I've still got the glass somewhere for the Hard Rock Cafe in Singapore. But I remember going to the market, and we were all looking for dodgy watches and the usual fake memorabilia you get. And we were in this market, like a market cafe, sort of an outdoor eating area. And one of the what you call the lucky men, he came round and he got a tray of watches. So I bought this solid gold Rolex. I paid whatever the Singapore money was. I paid the equivalent of about 15 quid for it, 20 quid for it. So you knew it was a genuine one because he told me it was solid gold. So we did what we'd got to do. We got on the plane, and I was proudly wearing this solid gold Rolex. And I basically, because we were going through different time zones, so I was on the plane and I had a look at it, changed the time on it, and I thought, okay, we're going through so many time zones now, but I'll keep changing the thing. Anyway, the first thing I did, changed the time on the watch. I looked at it, and both the hands had fallen off. So my 15 quid genuine Rolex was possibly not really what he'd sold me. But anyway, we get back home, back to Wolverhampton, all the freight comes back, but we'd heard a word that Goodyear as a company were in negotiations to sell the company, and I believe at the time it was James Goldsmith who put an offer in to buy Goodyear and what have you. And a lot of things were going down at the time, but the upshot of it all was that Goodyear withdrew from Formula One racing. I don't know what they actually announced in America, but at the time they withdrew from F1. So essentially, we were all out of work. And that meant that some of the permanent guys that were actually employed permanently by Goodyear, they were offered jobs back in the factory, on the road car divisions and truck tyres and aircraft tyres and things like that. But a lot of us, we were the temps. We were finished, and that was it. So that was the end of '86, and it turned out to be the end of my association with Goodyear. But I moved on from that one way or another, and we'll catch up with that in the next episode.